are you, Tom?
Very well.
Where's the good doctor? Where the hell is Doc every other night? He just comes here to pick up his mail, huh? Where's he off to this week?
He went to Florida.
That's back east and down south?
Yes.
He
took his wife with him, yes.
Okay.
He said he was going to Tampa with her.
What?
He was going to Tampa with her.
Did I understand the joke? He took his wife to Florida. He's going to tamper with her? Is that? Gee whiz. Oh. How about Springfield, Ohio? No, actually, another joke.
Near Orlando, I think.
Yeah, somewhere down there. Yeah, took his wife to Orlando. That doesn't work at all, does it? But our drummer, Eddie Shaughnessy, will be in concert at the College of Lake County, which is at Grace Lake, Illinois, this Sunday, March the 17th.
Thank you, sir.
Concert. Did you do a little clinic when you're there?
No, John, strictly concert.
Strictly concert?
Yeah.
No clinic. Tom, do you go out and do clinics?
I go to clinic.
Good morning. It's Friday, Fight Song Friday, February the 13th, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer and the patriotic song of the day, we will have Varney and Company, fight songs, and the Cold War. All that and more when I get back. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I should not change, the courage to change the things I should, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. Thank you, Maria. Then Stu-hoo-hoo.
Both numbers cooler or better than expected, causing the markets to reverse course. Have a great day, everybody, and a great long weekend. I'll see you on Tuesday. Varney and Company picks it up now. Stu, take it away.
Good morning, Maria. Good morning, everyone. Once again, the markets are hanging on a government report. Today, it's inflation. Here we go. In January, consumer prices went up 0.2%. In the last 12 months, inflation came in at 2.4%. Now, this means my interpretation is inflation is cooling. Before the numbers were released, stocks were mostly down. Now they're mostly high, but only just. Dow up 36, S&P up 7, NASDAQ up 27, but they're in the green. Before the numbers came out, interest rates were little changed. Now look at this. The 10-year Treasury, the yield on it has come all the way down to 4.09%. And the 2-year, that's down to 3.44%. Both yields down. Bitcoin, well, I'll call that range bound. It's still at $67,000 a coin. Oil, mid-$60 a barrel range. It's at $62.86 right now. But look at gas. It keeps on creeping closer to $3 a gallon. Up again today. National average for regular, $2.94. Well, there is other news. The dispute over funding for ICE has not been resolved. Another partial government shutdown is just hours away. ICE and Border Patrol are already funded. It's not clear what happens to other DHS operations like TSA and emergency management. On the show today, we'll bring you more from the dramatic face-off between Senator Josh Hawley and Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison. It was a shouting match. Hawley accused Ellison of meeting with fraudsters and then taking money from them. Hawley said, it's all on tape. Ellison said, it's all lies. We're covering the takeover of the Democrat Party by the far left. Gallup polling shows conservative Democrats are a dying breed, while ultra-liberals are now the driving force. Far-left AOC will be attending the important Munich Security Conference. She's there to enhance her leadership position in the party. The far left is definitely on the march. And, yeah, we're going back to the question, is it possible to fall in love with someone whose politics are opposite yours? Just wait till you see the messages you sent in. I'll tell you now, you are mostly positive about love crossing the aisle. Friday, February the 13th.
So anyways, there's for-profit Stu with his ridiculous comments about Valentine's Day because it's all about the Benjamins. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, the Cold War.
The date is November 4th, 1978. The place is Polyarny Naval Base, Murmansk Oblast. The time is 2:17 a.m. Outside, the wind doesn't howl. It screams. A physical, tearing sound that throws ice and sleet horizontally against the concrete piers. The water of the Kola Inlet is a mass of agitated black ink, freezing at the edges. This is the fortress of the Soviet Northern Fleet. This is the Bastion, the most heavily defended square mileage on Earth, the nesting ground for the ballistic missile submarines that hold the fate of New York, London, and Washington in their silos. Inside the Sector 4 harbor control room, Mickman, warrant officer, Pavel Voronov, feels the cold seeping through the steel walls. His eyes burn. He's been staring at the green glow of the P-15 sonar display for 6 hours. The room smells of acidic, damp wool and stale tobacco. On the screen, the harbor is a map of faint green lines, the permanent acoustic net, the magnetic sensors on the seabed, the patrols. Nothing moved. Nothing ever moved, except the slow, predictable trace of the Grisha-class patrol boat Delphin making its agonizingly slow circuit. At 2:19 a.m., something flickers. Voronov blinks, leaning closer. It is a whisper. A single, intermittent contact. It's not a whale. The acoustic signature is wrong. It's not a mini-sub. The magnetic anomaly sensor isn't triggering. It's small, impossibly small. And it is inside the primary anti-submarine net. It moves at less than 2 knots. It crawls. He taps the glass. "Starshi," he mutters to his superior. A young, arrogant Starshi lieutenant, senior lieutenant, slumped over a copy of Krasnaya Zvezda, Red Star. Contact. Sector 4. Inside the net. The lieutenant doesn't look up. A seal, McMahon. Or a sonar ghost. Log it and go back to sleep with your eyes open. It is moving parallel to the pier, Starshi, towards submarine dock 7. That gets the lieutenant's attention. Dock 7 is not just any dock. It holds K-441, a Delta II class SSBN, currently loading its R-29 missiles. A shadow falling on that submarine is not a naval matter. It is a state matter. The lieutenant is suddenly at Voronov's shoulder, his voice tight. "Active sonar. Ping it. Now." Voronov flips the switch. The sharp mechanical ping of the active sonar rings through the control room, a sound that shreds the underwater silence. On the screen, the patrol boat Delphin immediately turns. All eyes watch the display. The ping echoes off the piers, the seabed, and the hull of the K-441. The contact is gone. It does not flee. It does not dive. It simply ceases to exist. One moment, a crawl of green pixels. The next, nothing. As if it were never there, the lieutenant straightens up, a sheen of sweat on his forehead despite the cold. "A thermal layer," he says too quickly. "A pocket of fresh water. A system's ghost." It was a ghost. Voronov says nothing. He knows what he saw, and he knows thermal layers do not move with purpose. An hour later, the Delphin has swept the sector with its own active sonar. Nothing. The Starshi lieutenant has filed a report citing anomalous sonar phenomena, likely ice-related. The incident is closed. Voronov is relieved from his watch. He walks back to his barracks in the grey, pre-dawn light, the wind trying to peel the skin from his face. He cannot shake the feeling. Ghosts do not move towards missile submarines. At 9:30 a.m., the shift changes. The wind has died, leaving a suffocating, heavy sky. A team of Vodalese, combat divers, enters the frigid water for a routine hull inspection on K-441 before its patrol. The water temperature is 1 degree Celsius. Survival, even in their heavy, heated dry suits, is measured in minutes. The lead diver, a Mi'kmaq named Stakhanov, descends into the absolute blackness. He follows his guideline to the submarine's massive 7-bladed propeller. He runs his gloved hand over the acoustic dampening tiles, checking for wear. Then, his hand finds something that should not be there. It is a line. A thin, taut wire, almost invisible, running from the submarine's hull away into the silt. He follows it. 10 meters. 20. It leads him to the main seabed communications array for Sector 4. He expects to find it snagged. He finds something else. He finds the junction box. The heavy steel plate has been unbolted. Inside, the primary data cable, a bundle of fibers thicker than his wrist, carrying all acoustic and magnetic sensor data for the most sensitive part of the harbor, is not broken. It is not frayed. It has been cut. The cut is surgical. A perfect, clean severance. Stakhanov's blood turns to ice water, colder than the fjord. He reports it, his voice shaking through the comms. The surface operator hears one word: sabotage. Within an hour, Poliani is locked down. No ship moves, no man leaves. KGB border guards swarm the piers. A contra-admiral, rear admiral, the base commander, is in the control room, his face the color of wet concrete. He stares at the sonar display, then at the terrified Starship lieutenant from the night watch. "You reported a ghost?" the admiral whispers, his voice shaking with a rage so deep it's almost silent. "It vanished, Admiral," the lieutenant stammers. "It was impossible. And this," the admiral holds up the dripping 3-inch segment of cable the diver brought up, "is impossible. This base is sealed. The water is lethal. The nets are active. No submarine can get in here. No man can be in that water for more than 5 minutes. So, you will tell me, what cut this cable?" The room is silent. The ghost from 2:19 a.m. is no longer a glitch. It is a phantom. A phantom that can bypass a 1 billion ruble defense network. A phantom that can operate in water that kills. A phantom that can swim up to a nuclear-armed submarine, perform delicate work with a surgeon's precision, and then vanish from the most powerful sonar in the world. We interrupt this story to ask for your support. This channel, Cold War Impact, survives on your viewership. If you're fascinated by the hidden histories and the incredible technological battles of the Cold War, you are in the right place. We spend weeks researching declassified archives and first-hand accounts to bring you these stories. If you want to see more, please take 1 second to click the subscribe button. It is the single best way to ensure we can keep making this content. Thank you. Now, back to the mystery in Murmansk. The meeting that followed was not a debrief. It was an interrogation. The KGB internal security officer, a pale man in a dark suit, asked the questions. Did the nets register a breach? No, Comrade Capitan. Did the magnetic sensors register a hull? No. Did the patrol boats see a wake? No. Then the logical conclusion, the KGB officer said, is that the diver, Mi'kmaq Stakhanov, is a liar and a saboteur. He cut the cable himself. Impossible, the admiral shot back. His suit is monitored. His comms are recorded. His partner was with him. And that, he pointed at the sonar log, happened 7 hours earlier. Voronov saw it. This thing was here. The room descended into a frantic, paranoid argument. It was a new type of American mini-sub. But how did it bypass the magnetic sensors? It was a trained dolphin, but how did it use a cutting tool? It was a Spetsnaz defector, but no one was missing. The fear in the room was palpable because the stakes were not just about one cut cable. This was the crown jewel of the Soviet Navy. The Northern Fleet was the fist of the motherland. Its purpose was singular. In the event of war, these submarines would surge into the Atlantic, vaporize the American eastern seaboard, and hunt the NATO fleets. Their survival depended on the bastion strategy, the idea that their home ports were impenetrable fortresses from which they could sortie, protected by the full might of the Soviet air, surface, and submarine fleets. This incident shattered that illusion. If a single, undetectable something could slip past their nets, their sonar, their patrols, and their guard towers, it was not just a security breach, it was a strategic catastrophe. If a phantom could get in and cut a cable, it could get in and plant a mine. It could attach a new, undetectable acoustic beacon to the hull of the K-441, broadcasting its position to every American attack submarine waiting in the Barents Sea. It could poison the diver air supply depots. It could map the harbor's vulnerabilities one by one. The enemy was not at the gate. The enemy was inside the house. The report that went to Moscow was sanitized. It spoke of suspected foreign sabotage and unidentified underwater phenomena. But within the highest circles of the Soviet Admiralty, a new terror was born. They had spent trillions of rubles building a fleet to fight the Americans in the deep ocean. They had built layers of steel and sonar to protect that fleet at home. And now they had proof. All of it was useless. They were fighting a ghost that could swim in ice water, a ghost that left no trace, a ghost that could hold a knife to the throat of their most powerful weapons, right in their own beds. The Soviet admirals were not just concerned. They were, for the first time, horrified. They had no theory. They had no countermeasure. They had no idea what they were facing. And the cable cut at Polyarny was only the beginning. The Polyarny incident did not remain an isolated file. It became a data point, and the data set was growing. March 1980. A naval communication station near Vladivostok, the headquarters of the Soviet Pacific Fleet. The station monitors the primary underwater arrays guarding the Sea of Okhotsk. One night, the entire array, stretching for 50 kilometers across the La Perouse Strait, went silent. Not a section. The entire system. A patrol vessel dispatched to the master junction buoy found the buoy's mooring cables had been severed with the same impossible precision. But this time, the saboteurs had left something behind. Bolted to the buoy's casing, 6 meters below the storm-tossed surface, was a small, waterproof box. A Vimpel Spetsnaz team, the GRU's most elite divers, was flown in from Moscow. They retrieved the box. It was not a mine. It was not a listening device. It was impossibly a souvenir. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was a Zippo lighter engraved with the insignia of the U.S. Navy Submarine Force. The admirals in Moscow were incandescent with rage. This was not sabotage. This was a taunt. It was a message. It was an enemy that could penetrate their most secure waters, disable their primary defenses, and leave a calling card. Just to prove they could. The hunt for answers began, and it was a scramble defined by paranoia and technological desperation. The KGB's Third Chief Directorate, Military Counterintelligence, and the GRU, Main Intelligence Directorate, immediately went to war with each other, each blaming the other for the lapse. The admirals blamed the engineers. The engineers blamed the operators. A special commission was formed, codenamed Ziva, or Beast. Its one and only job was to identify and neutralize this phantom. Their first step was to analyze the how. The working theory held that the enemy must be using a new class of mini-submarine. This was the only logical explanation. A conventional attack sub, even a small one, would be detected by the magnetic anomaly sensors and the fixed acoustic nets. A diver operating alone could not survive the lethal cold or the transit times. Therefore, the enemy had to have a small deployable vehicle, probably launched from a mother sub, waiting in international waters. This theory sent the Soviet engineering bureaus into a frenzy. Millions of rubles were poured into anti-diver and anti-mini sub defenses. They began reinforcing their harbor nets, adding layers of finer mesh, almost like curtains of chainmail, designed to snag propellers, no matter how small. They deployed interceptor divers, their own Vodolese, to sit in pressurized underwater habitats on the seabed for days at a time, waiting in the cold, black silence for anything that moved. They accelerated development of the MG7 Sturliad sonar, a high-frequency system designed specifically to detect small objects, even a man. Patrol boats like the Delphin were retrofitted and sent on endless, repetitive circuits, flooding their own harbors with so much active pinging that they deafened their own sensor arrays. And the phantoms just kept coming. May 1981. Petropavlovsk-Kamchatsky, the home of the Pacific Fleet's SSBN Bastion, a sonar operator on a Grisha 3 Corvette, sweeping the approaches to Avacha Bay, got a contact. It was the perfect Ziva profile. Small, slow, non-metallic. The captain didn't hesitate. He gave the order. A spread of RBU 6000 anti-submarine rockets was fired. 12 tubes, each launching a 213mm projectile, arced into the grey sky. They rained down in a tight pattern, churning the sea into a white cauldron of superheated steam and concussion. The shockwave rattled the teeth of every man on the ship. The sonar operator listened intently to the hydrophones. He heard the explosions. He heard the rumble of the shockwaves. And then, underneath it all, he heard laughter. It was not human. It was a modulated electronic signal. A series of chirps and clicks that sounded, to the horrified operator, exactly like a dolphin's cackle, broadcast on a secure naval frequency. Then, like the ghost at Poliani, the contact accelerated from 3 knots to over 30 knots in seconds, a speed no conventional submarine could achieve so quickly, and vanished into the deep. The report from the corvette captain was buried. The sonar operator was transferred to a desk in Siberia, but the story leaked. This is how the legend was built. The Phantom was no longer just a saboteur. It was a bogeyman. Among the crews of the Northern and Pacific fleets, the rumors became a kind of gallows humor. They weren't fighting a man or a machine. They were fighting Vodyanoi, the water spirit of Slavic myth, a creature that lived in the silt and drowned sailors for sport. Pilots of the two 142 Bear maritime patrol aircraft, lumbering over the Barents Sea for 20-hour stretches, would report ghost echoes on their radar surface, contacts that would appear for a minute and vanish before they could get a visual. Submarine captains, running silent in their bastions, would log knuckles in their sonar, the terrifying, distinct sound of a distant propeller cavitation, a sound that meant someone else was in their safe harbor. But when they initiated a hunt, there was nothing. The ocean was empty. The ZVR Commission was failing. Every countermeasure was met with another, more brazen intrusion. They mined the entrances to their harbors. A month later, the mines were found neatly piled on the seabed, disarmed, their magnetic triggers bypassed. The wrong conclusions began to solidify into official dogma. The enemy was not a mini-sub, the propulsion was too advanced. The laughter incident, combined with the impossible speed, pointed to something else. The Commission began seriously investigating a radical theory. The Americans were using weaponized cetaceans, trained dolphins or beluga whales, fitted with harnesses and cutting tools, guided by acoustic signals. This theory, while seemingly fantastic, was the only one that fit the data. It explained the lac pre-dawn of a metallic signature. It explained the ability to withstand the cold. It explained the biological sounds the sonar operators sometimes reported. The GRU dedicated an entire division to capturing one of these warrior dolphins. They strung nets laced with tranquilizers. They attempted to poison entire fjords. They captured hundreds of dolphins. None of them were wearing harnesses. Another faction, based in the Air Defense Forces, believed the threat was atmospheric. They pointed to the ghost radar echoes. This wasn't a submarine at all, they argued. It was a new type of high-altitude reconnaissance craft, something that flew so high and so fast it could project false contacts onto their surface search radars, sowing paranoia and forcing their fleet to chase shadows. This theory gained traction because it was less terrifying than the alternative that the enemy was already inside. But the admirals knew the truth. The cut cables were real. The disarmed mines were real. The threat was wet, cold, and utterly silent. Their paranoia reached its peak in 1983. Admiral Gorshkov, the father of the modern Soviet Navy, reviewed the ZVR file. It was now thousands of pages thick. It detailed dozens of confirmed infiltrations, not just in Poliani or Vladivostok, but in Severomorsk, Gadjevo, and even in the supposedly secure Baltic Sea. The report concluded that Soviet naval bases, the multi-trillion ruble bastions designed to guarantee the nation's survival, were as secure as a public swimming pool. The report stated that an unknown enemy asset could, at will, enter and exit any harbor without detection, neutralize all primary sensor systems. Nets, sonar, magnetic, approach and tag any high-value warship, including ballistic missile submarines, perform complex sabotage tasks in lethal zero-visibility water, evade all attempts at capture or destruction. The enemy, the report concluded, was not a machine. It was not an animal. It was a man. This conclusion was the most terrifying of all. Because if it was a man, what kind of man? What kind of technology allowed him to breathe for hours in water that could kill in minutes? What kind of propulsion system allowed him to move with the speed of a fish but the silence of the silt? What kind of navigation allowed him to operate with surgical precision in total darkness? The Soviets had their own combat divers, the Spetsnaz. They were the hardest men in the entire armed forces. They were trained to kill, to sabotage, to die. And the admirals knew, with chilling certainty, that not one of them could do this. Not one of them could survive the mission profile. They had hunted for a submarine. They had hunted for a dolphin. They had hunted for a ghost. And all this time, the bogeyman was a man. The admirals were horrified. They were facing an enemy diver who was not a man, but a phantom. They had built a wall of steel, and the enemy had simply learned to breathe water and pass through it like mist. They had no weapon, no defense, and no answer. While the ZVR Commission chased spectral dolphins in the frozen dark of the Barents Sea, a different kind of work was being done in the blinding sunlight of Coronado, California, and the humid wetlands of Little Creek, Virginia. The men conducting this work were not ghosts, but they were training to become them. The American perspective was entirely different. The admirals in the Pentagon were not defined by paranoia. They were driven by a problem. The problem was the Bastion. The Soviet strategy was sound. Their home ports were fortresses. A conventional NATO carrier group that tried to sail into the Kola Inlet would be annihilated in minutes by a saturation attack of sunburn anti-ship missiles. A conventional American submarine that tried to hunt in the crowded, noisy, and heavily mined harbors would be trapped and killed. The Soviet strategy was to build an impenetrable wall. The American solution was not to knock the wall down. The American solution was to find a man who could step through it. This mission fell to the U.S. Navy's Naval Special Warfare Command, the SEALs. But the men themselves, as tough as they were only one part of the equation. The true source of the Phantom was not just the warrior. It was the system that delivered him. It was the suite of ingenious asymmetric technology that allowed a human being to operate in an environment where the laws of physics and biology said he should be dead. The Soviets were hunting for a single thing. A mini-sub, a new torpedo, a trained whale. They were wrong. They were facing an integrated system of American ingenuity, a trinity of man, machine, and method. First, there was the problem of the man. The Soviets were correct. A human being cannot survive in 1 degree Celsius water. He will be incapacitated by hypothermia in minutes and dead soon after. A diver in a standard neoprene wetsuit, which traps a layer of water against the skin, is only marginally better off. The cold simply wins. The American solution was to take the water out of the equation. The SEALs were equipped with advanced dry suits, a rubberized cocoon that kept the operator completely isolated from the sea. But even that wasn't enough. The sheer compressive cold of the deep would eventually seep through. The true innovation was what they wore underneath, electrically heated undergarments. These were suits of fine wiring, powered by a sophisticated lithium battery pack that actively warmed the diver's core and extremities. The Phantom, who cut the cable at Poliani, wasn't a demon who was immune to the cold. He was a man in a portable, battery-powered habitat. While the Soviet Vodolezi had to be rotated out of the water every 30 minutes, their bodies racked with uncontrollable shivers, the American operator could remain submerged, perfectly comfortable and fully functional, for 6, 7, or even 8 hours. Second, there was the problem of the ghost. The Soviets were baffled by a saboteur who left no trace, who could move without creating a single bubble. Their entire acoustic net system was designed to listen for 2 things: the cavitation of a propeller and the hiss of exhaled air from a scuba system. This is where the Americans made one of their greatest leaps. The SEALs did not use scuba. Scuba, the self-contained underwater breathing apparatus invented by Jacques Cousteau, is an open-circuit system. A diver breathes compressed air from a tank, and when he exhales, that air is vented directly into the water. The result is a loud, constant, and highly visible stream of bubbles. The SEALs used a closed-circuit rebreather. The model of choice was the Draeger La 5. This was a device that seemed to defy logic. It was small, worn on the chest. It didn't use a large tank of compressed air. It used a small bottle of pure oxygen. When the SEAL exhaled, his breath didn't vent into the sea. It went into a counterlung bag. The air then passed through a canister filled with a chemical soda lime, which scrubbed the carbon dioxide, the poison, from his breath. The remaining air, now just oxygen depleted, was then enriched with a tiny, precise puff of pure oxygen from the tank, and the diver breathed it in again. The effect was revolutionary. It was quite literally an artificial gill. It produced 0 bubbles. It was completely utterly silent. The sonar operator in Polyarny heard nothing because there was nothing to hear. The ghost wasn't a glitch. It was a man breathing his own, recycled air. The rebreather didn't just hide the diver. It erased him from the acoustic world. Finally, there was the problem of the mini-sub. The Soviets were convinced they were facing a new small metallic submarine. They were hunting for a steel hull with their magnetic anomaly detectors, MAD. They were listening for a propeller with their hydrophones. And they found nothing, because they were hunting the wrong animal. The impossible vehicle was the Seal Delivery Vehicle, or SDV. The most common variant was the Mark 8. The SDV was not a submarine, it was a wet sub. This distinction is critical. A submarine has a pressure hull. The operators are inside, dry and warm. The SDV was a free-flooding vehicle. The operators, a pilot, a navigator, and a team of 4 combat swimmers were in the water with it, riding it like an underwater chariot, breathing from their rebreathers, warmed by their electric suits. And what was the SDV made of? Not steel, not titanium. It was made of fiberglass. This was the masterstroke. The Soviets' entire harbor defense network, all those magnetic sensors layered on the seabed, were designed to detect the massive ferrous metal signature of a submarine hull. The SDV, a shell of glass-reinforced plastic, slid over them with a magnetic signature so low it was indistinguishable from a small piece of seafloor debris. It simply did not register. And its propulsion, not a clattering diesel engine or a complex reactor, it was powered by silver-zinc batteries. The motor was electric, precision-engineered to be almost silent. At its standard transit speed of 3 knots, the crawl that Michman Voronov had seen on his screen, the SDV's acoustic signature was below the ambient background noise of a busy harbor. It was quieter than the ice cracking in the fjord. It was quieter than a school of shrimp. The Soviets were hunting for a submarine. The Americans sent a fiberglass shell, pushed by a whisper. But the final piece of the puzzle was the most audacious. How did this impossible team get there in the first place? They did not swim from America. They did not launch from a surface ship, which would be spotted by radar. They were delivered by the one thing the Soviets were looking for, a nuclear-powered attack submarine. U.S. Navy Sturgeon, and later, Los Angeles-class submarines were modified for this exact purpose. Bolted to the submarine's hull, just behind the sail, was a massive cylinder. It looked like a fuel tank. This was the dry deck shelter, or DDS. The mother submarine would creep into the Barents Sea, running utterly silent. It would find a dark, deep canyon on the seabed, miles from the Soviet harbor, and settle motionless in the silt. The SEAL team would move from the submarine's interior into the DDS. They would unmoor their SDV, which was parked inside this underwater garage. They would flood the shelter, equalize the pressure, and open the massive outer door. And then, from the side of a 6,000-ton American Predator, a tiny, silent fiberglass pod would detach and begin its slow, methodical 8-hour journey into the black. They were not operating blind. The pilot and navigator weren't looking through a periscope. They were navigating in total silt-filled blackness, using a sophisticated inertial navigation system, INS. They knew exactly where they were, every second. As they approached the harbor, they would use a high-frequency Doppler sonar, a system whose pings were at a frequency too high for the Soviet defenders to even hear, to paint a perfect photographic map of the seabed, the nets, the mines, and the hulls of the warships tied to the pier. The Phantom at Polyarny was a 6-man team. They had driven their SDV, the Ghost, on the sonar, directly under the Delphin patrol boat. They had parked it in the mud, 30 meters from the quay, 441. 2 divers, the surgeons, dismounted. They swam to the cable, unbolted the junction box, and cut the cable with a simple hydraulic tool. The active sonar ping that the Starship lieutenant had ordered was the moment of greatest danger. But the SEALs had trained for this. The moment the ping hit them, they did not flee. They did not move. They simply lay flat in the silt, motionless, their rebreathers making no sound. When the active sonar swept over them, their rubber-suited bodies had the same acoustic return as a cluster of seaweed. To the sonar operator, they were just the bottom. After the Delphin moved on, they swam back to their SDV, reattached, and flew back out of the harbor, right past the reinforced nets. They returned to the mother sub, drove the SDV back into the dry deck shelter, sealed the door, and were gone. By the time the Soviet divers found the cut cable, the SEALs were 100 miles away, eating a hot meal, and the Los Angeles-class submarine was already disappearing into the deep Atlantic. This was the American solution. It was a triumph of asymmetric, technological innovation. The Soviets built a wall of steel to detect steel. The Americans sent phantoms of fiberglass, rubber, and recycled air. For years, the ZVER commission files piled up. The reports from Polyarny, Vladivostok, and Petropavlovsk grew thicker, filled with grainy sonar images of nothing, and frantic reports from ship captains who were, one by one, being dismissed as paranoid or drunk. The Soviet Admiralty was stuck in a loop of helpless rage. They were haunted. The truth did not come from a lucky sonar ping. It did not come from a captured piece of equipment. The truth walked, in a state of nervous exhaustion, into the American embassy in Bonn, West Germany, in June of 1985. He was a Kapitan Tugo Ranga, captain second rank, in Soviet naval intelligence. For the purpose of his new life, he was given the name Victor. He was a high-value asset, a man who had sat in on the ZVER commission meetings. He was one of the men who had personally analyzed the cut cable from Polyarny. He was placed in a safe house in rural Virginia. For 3 weeks he was debriefed. He told his CIA handlers everything. He laid out the Soviet order of battle for the Northern Fleet. He described the patrol schedules. He detailed the command structure. And then, with a mix of professional pride and deep-seated fear, he told them about the Phantom. He described the impossible infiltrations. He told them about the sonar ghost that moved at 3 knots. He told them about the laughter recorded by the Grisha 3 Corvette. He told them about the Zippo lighter left on the buoy. "We have theories, of course," Victor said, leaning forward, the smoke from his cigarette curling in the still air of the room. "The admirals believe it is weaponized dolphins. A foolish idea. The GRU believes it is a new class of automated mini-sub, but the propulsion physics, they don't work. The object accelerates from 3 knots to 30. Impossible." He looked at his American debriefer, a quiet man in a nondescript suit named Jim. "We call it the Vodianoi," Victor said. "The water spirit. It is the only explanation that fits, as a bogeyman." Jim nodded slowly. He let the silence sit for a moment. Then he pushed a thin beige file across the table. "You were right about one thing, Victor. You were hunting a spirit." Victor opened the file. The first photograph was an aerial shot of an American Sturgeon-class submarine. He had seen hundreds of these, but this one was different. There was a large cylindrical hump bolted to the hull, just behind the conning tower. "A new sonar pod?" Victor guessed. "We call it a dry deck shelter," Jim said. "It's an underwater garage." Victor turned the page. The next photo was of a strange black vehicle. It looked primitive, like a torpedo, but with seats. It was open to the water. The hull was dull, non-reflective. "A wet sub," Jim explained. "We call it an SDV. Seal delivery vehicle. The hull isn't steel. It's fiberglass." Victor's blood ran cold. "Fiberglass." He said the word in a whisper. "The magnetic sensors. They would see nothing." "Nothing," Jim confirmed. "And the motor is electric. At 3 knots, its acoustic signature is lower than the ambient noise of the ice cracking in your own harbor." Victor's hands were shaking. He turned the page. The final photograph was of a man. He was tall, lean, and dripping wet, standing on the deck of a ship. He was encased in a sleek, black rubber suit. He had no bulky air tanks on his back. Instead, he wore a small, compact device on his chest. "This is the spirit," Jim said. Victor stared. "But the water. Murmansk is 1 degree. He would be dead in 10 minutes, and his bubbles. Our sonar would hear his breathing." This was the moment. The shock moment. The instant the entire Soviet defense doctrine, the multi-trillion ruble bastion strategy, was rendered utterly and completely obsolete. Jim tapped the man's chest. "That's a Draeger LARV. It's a closed-circuit rebreather. He breathes his own air, Victor. The machine scrubs the CO2 and adds a little oxygen. It makes no sound. It makes 0 bubbles." Victor looked at the man's suit. "And the suit?" Jim smiled. "It's heated, battery-powered. He can stay in 1 degree water for 8 hours. He can be comfortable." Victor slumped back in his chair. The file fell open. The ghost at Polyarny, the demon at Petropavlovsk, The impossible sabotage. It was all there. A fiberglass boat, a battery-powered suit, an artificial gill. It wasn't a billion-dollar superweapon. It wasn't a new law of physics. It wasn't a dolphin. It was just a man. A man delivered by an underwater garage, riding a plastic boat, wearing an electric sweater and a silent gill. The humiliation was a physical blow. Victor felt it in his chest. All their nets, all their sonar arrays, all their patrol boats, all their Spetsnaz divers, all their admirals and their commissions. All of it defeated by a handful of simple, ingenious, integrated technologies. He finally understood. The impossible acceleration from 3 knots to 30, it was never the same object. It was the SDV, the ghost, crawling in at 3 knots, and the laughter, that was the second object. A small diver-placed acoustic jammer designed to activate when the RBU 60000 rockets hit the water. It would broadcast the dolphin sound and then fire a small high-speed propellant to create a vanish signature. It was a magic trick. It was psychological warfare. They weren't just bypassing the Soviet defenses. They were mocking them. They were intentionally creating a legend, a bogeyman, to shatter the confidence of the entire Soviet Navy. And it had worked. This was the true shock that the admirals had been avoiding. The horrifying realization was not that the Americans had a new submarine. It was that the Americans could walk into their most secure facilities at will. When the truth finally, slowly, disseminated through the highest levels of the Soviet command, the response was one of futile, reactionary panic. They couldn't replicate the American system. They tried. Their attempts to build a reliable closed-circuit rebreather ended in disaster, killing some of their best divers with hypoxia when the oxygen sensors failed. Their heated suits shorted out. They didn't have the microelectronics or the battery technology. They were in a race they couldn't win, so they responded in the only way they knew how, brute force. If they couldn't stop the Phantoms, they would hunt the motherships. This decision gave birth to one of the most terrifying and tragic weapons of the Cold War. The Project 970-1, the Shuka B, the Akula-class submarine. The Akula was a masterpiece of Soviet engineering. It was a 12,000-ton behemoth, a predator built for one purpose, to hunt and kill the American Los Angeles-class submarines. The Soviets poured everything they had into it. They invented new milling techniques to make the propellers silent. They placed the entire engine room on a massive 2-stage dampened raft to isolate its vibrations from the hull. The result was a submarine that was, for the first time, quieter than its American rival. The Soviet admirals finally had their counter. Their new Akula hunter-killers would stalk the Barents Sea, find the American motherships, and put a torpedo in them long before they could deploy their Phantoms. But it was a futile gesture. The Akula was a perfect piece of hardware, but it was deaf. The Americans had already won the other war, the war of processing. The American BQQ-5 sonar system and its associated computers could hear a pin drop in a hurricane. It could distinguish the signature of a Sturgeon-class sub from a Los Angeles-class sub, from the signature of the Acto-class sub hunting it, even when the Akula was quieter. The Akula was a silent man in a dark room wearing earplugs. The American sub was a man who could see in the dark. The Soviets had built the perfect counter-weapon, but they were once again reacting to a threat they had misunderstood. They were trying to build a bigger wall, while the Americans were operating in a different dimension. The infiltrations continued. The Phantoms kept swimming. The Soviet Navy, for all its missiles and all its subs, remained a prisoner in its own fortresses, terrified of the men who could breathe water. The final verdict on this hidden war was not written in a peace treaty, and it was not announced in a press conference. It was written in the operational plans of the United States Navy. By the mid-1980s, because of the Phantom program, the Soviet Bastion strategy was considered, in the quiet, classified rooms of the Pentagon, a solved problem. The fortress, for all its missiles, mines, and guards, was strategically nullified. This is the killer statistic. Though it is not a number, it is a capability. The true terrifying purpose of the SEAL delivery vehicle system was not, in the long run, to cut cables. That was a test. That was psychological warfare. The real mission was far more devastating. The Phantoms that slipped into Polyarny and Vladivostok were not just saboteurs, they were scouts. They were cartographers of the enemy's inner sanctum. On their fiberglass sleds, they carried not just cutting tools, but a new generation of American technology. Digital mapping, sonar, signals, intelligence receivers, and, most critically, UPT's underwater passive tapes. A UPT was a self-contained listening post. A team of SEALs would drive their silent SDV into the mouth of Avasha Bay, navigate to a point just off the main submarine channel, and bury a small, metallic cylinder in the silt. This cylinder was a package of sophisticated hydrophones and a digital recorder powered by a battery that would last for months. When the Akula-class hunter-killer submarine Tiger, the pride of the Pacific Fleet, slipped its moorings and headed for the open ocean, it believed it was running silent. It believed it was the Predator, the apex of Soviet technology, finally free to hunt. But as it passed over that patch of empty seabed, its unique multi-bladed propeller signature, its turbine whine, and its precise acoustic fingerprint were all perfectly recorded by the UPT. Weeks later, a SEAL team would return, retrieve the tape, and deliver it to the Office of Naval Intelligence. The result? Every single Soviet submarine, every Delta IV, every Akula, every Typhoon now had its voice recorded in an American library. The BQQ-5 sonar systems on the Los Angeles-class submarines were updated, their computers programmed to listen not just for a submarine, but for Tiger itself. This was the checkmate. The Soviet admirals were horrified by the man who could swim in ice. They should have been horrified by the man who could leave an invisible digital ear behind. This technological and strategic gap was not an accident. It was not because American engineers were smarter or Soviet engineers were lazier. It was the inevitable fatal outcome of the two systems they represented. The Soviet Union was a system built for imitation. The entire Soviet economy was in many ways a colossal act of reverse engineering. When an American B-29 bomber crash-landed in Siberia during World War II, Stalin had it dismantled, piece by piece. His engineers were ordered to copy it, down to the last rivet, including a patch of paint damage on the wing. They did. The result, the Tupolev Tu-4, was a perfect rivet-for-rivet clone. This was the Soviet genius. Brute force replication. When they saw the Los Angeles class sub, they built the Akula, a brilliant, direct, and crushingly expensive counter. But the Soviet system was fundamentally incapable of innovation. True innovation is a messy, chaotic, and interdisciplinary process. It is born when a materials scientist working on fiberglass boat hulls has a casual lunch with an electrical engineer working on battery chemistry, who then plays racquetball with a biologist who understands human respiratory physiology. The Phantom system, the SDV, was a product of this exact environment. It was not one invention. It was a synthesis. It was a system of systems. The Soviet system, defined by its rigid, top-down, paranoid stovepipes, made this impossible. The bureau that designed submarines did not talk to the bureau that designed diving gear. The bureau that designed electronics had no incentive to share its failures with the bureau that designed batteries. The result was a collection of brilliant but isolated pieces. They had the Akula submarine, but they did not have the sonar to make it effective. They had Spetsnaz divers, but they did not have the rebreathers or heated suits to make them survivable. They had built the world's heaviest, strongest, and most expensive suit of medieval armor in the age of the invisible bullet. The Akula is the perfect metaphor for the collapse that was to come. It was an astonishing technological achievement that was, by the time it sailed, already strategically bankrupt. The rubles spent on its silent milling machines and its massive titanium hull were rubles not spent on the microprocessors and computer sciences that were already defining the next war. The Zever Commission, in its hunt for a dolphin or a ghost, was a picture of the entire Soviet state in its final decade. A bureaucratic giant, blinded by its own ideology, chasing a phantom it could not understand. It was bankrupted not by the Star Wars missile defense shield, but by the quiet, persistent, and unanswerable challenge of fiberglass, soda lime, and a battery-powered sweater. The Cold War was, in the end, a battle of ideas, and the Phantom was the decisive argument. The true legacy of the Cold War is not just the image of a wall crumbling in Berlin. It is the much quieter, darker, and colder image from 1978. It is the image of a Soviet admiral, the commander of the most powerful fleet on Earth, standing in a concrete bunker, staring at a green sonar screen that showed nothing. He was safe in his fortress. His nets were active. His patrols were out. His nuclear-armed submarines were steps away. And yet, he was gripped by a cold, primal horror. He was terrified because he knew in his bones that the enemy was already inside. He was horrified because he was facing an enemy that did not play by his rules, an enemy that had stepped outside the known laws of his universe. He was hunting a submarine. He was hunting a machine, but he was haunted by a man.
And that was the Cold War. Back in a minute. Thank you. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there, and reminding you that you're not neutral and that the government has no rights.